AJ Jakubec, welcome to the show. Glad to have you. Of course, the play-by-play voice of the Ottawa REDBLACKS, and you're on TSN 1200 up there. How you doing this morning?
Doing well, yeah. Excited about we'll see where this news goes in terms of CFL and a season. I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of different things, future, present, all that kind of stuff. But in the end, I'm just fingers crossed and hoping that we get something in 2021, because I know, I missed it a lot in 2020, and I think a lot of other people in this country missed it as well. And we need some sort of football in 2021, whether it's a shortened season or whatever. And at least, I think there's optimism in a lot of circles that there's going to be some sort of season. So that's good enough for me.
Yeah, it seems like, at least across the board that I've heard, I mean, people feel pretty positive about it. I want, us to be positive about it. It's still scary just because we don't know time-wise kind of, how everything's going to go, right? But do you feel overwhelming, from people that listen to you, that, that call into your shows and stuff? Are they feeling good so far about everything happening?
It depends, there's different levels. It depends on who you talk to, right? There's different levels of optimism and pessimism, no matter who you talk to. I've got a friend that's an ICU doctor in the area. I talked to a number of different doctors about, to me, I don't know why you'd listen to this. I don't want to get into politics or anything like that. But to me, this has always been a health issue, right? And it's become a political issue. But the reality is this is a health issue, right? So if I want to talk about sports, about football, I talk to a football guy. If I want to talk about politics, I call a friend that works in politics. If I want to get information about health, I talk to doctors, right? And so I guess the one thing that encourages me and why I'm maybe a little more optimistic than pessimistic is when you talk to doctors right now, they think, like in Ontario right now, it's not good. But they think that if you look into the future, you kind of look 8 to 10 weeks ahead, that you look at where Israel is at and that, probably the US gets there before Canada and, UK gets there before Canada. But you look at where Israel is at right now and they're pretty close to normal life right now. So that's, I go by that more than anything else. It's tough to, you can get you can get down a rabbit hole, right? You can find a lot of different information that scares you and all that kind of stuff. But, just based on that, I'm optimistic more than pessimistic. How quick is it going to turn around once we get to that point? Are the authorities going to, are they going to say, hey, we want normal life as quick as possible? Or are they going to be cautious as they've been in Canada and in particular in Ontario? Once we get to that point, those questions I can't answer, but I think everyone wants to get back to normal life as quickly as possible. And so once a good part of the population is vaccinated, I think I'm hopeful that we start to work in that direction.
How does the league pull it off? Let's just try to be a little bit more pessimistic than optimistic. How does the league pull off a season if things don't get under control, if fans aren't in the stands? I'm talking from a financial standpoint.
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, because I don't think there's any doubt they need fans and stands, right? There needs to be some sort of indication by June that they're going to get fans and stands somewhere in Canada, right? Like, to me, if all of a sudden in June, Ontario is still hesitant, maybe cases are still high, hospitalizations are still high, the healthcare system is still, being stretched, then I don't think they're going to be at that point in a position to say, okay, on Ottawa, Hamilton, Toronto, you guys can host games in August. I don't know if we'll be there yet, but if all of a sudden in, let's say, Alberta, they say it's full bore, all right, they're hoping to have fans at games in Stanley Cup playoff games in Alberta at some point. And so, and as we know, or at least we should know, indoors is, in terms of transmission, the virus transmits far easier indoors than outdoors. So if all of a sudden Alberta has if there's Edmonton Oilers playoff games with even 2,000 people there, that'll be my indication that, okay, you know what, outdoors is safer than indoors, and Alberta is headed in this direction. So there's two teams there. Saskatchewan would likely follow. So, I mean, could you have a bunch of games in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and maybe Manitoba to start? I think you could. And I think that's the indication that I've been given and talking to people close to the Red Blacks, is that they expect to start the season on the road. And how long that's going to be, is that going to be a couple of games? Is that going to be 4 games? I don't know. They've done this before when they had a soccer team where, they'd play games in April, but quite frankly, they'd start on the road and play 4 or 5 games on the road and come back and, play a lot of home games after that. So I think everyone's just looking at a lot of different options here. But I know in terms of the Red Blacks, and I get it, one of the issues I think in the CFL, and it's always been an issue, it's hard to get unanimity in a 9-team league, but I know Ottawa in particular is hell-bent on playing this year, and I think that's the majority of the teams for sure.
Yeah, it's just tough. And I went back and forth with Dave Campbell about this last night online. He's been on the show before too. Randy came out with his video yesterday, and one of the ideas they said is, the teams in the East playing in the West, like you said, on the road, right? If transmissions, whatever, are still bad come August. But, and we've never covered the CFL, going into the season now, obviously, and really getting involved in all this. And Dave feels like Randy is being really transparent and really honest about it in a way maybe that we're not used to, right? Or maybe we're expecting too much. But when I watch that and I go, that's the only thing they mentioned in the video is, well, we could, if we could play on the road. I'm like, yeah, but what if you can't play on the road? Or what if, that's where I just start getting worried about it, right? Where if that's the one idea that's been put out, are there other ideas? I don't know. And that's what we're trying to, that was where my fear went yesterday, kind of watching that announcement video.
Yeah. I mean, look, if we're in the same spot, cases wise, hospitalization, again, that's the key, right? We're never mind cases at this stage. It's about hospitalizations, right? And if we're at that same point 6 weeks from now in terms of hospitalizations, then I'd probably feel you. I hope we're not. Again, in terms of the conversations I've had with doctors, they think, at least in Ottawa, that the next 2-3 weeks are going to be tough, but they seem to think that this thing's going to be turned around by then. So we'll see, right? We'll see. I mean, and hey, they admit that I don't think there's a lot of people that thought this third wave was going to be as harsh as it's been, right? This is our numbers are as bad as they've ever been in terms of, the hospital system being stretched. So could that still be the case in 2 months? Could there still be issues in terms of, supply when it comes to vaccines? I guess we'll wait and see, but, hopefully in 6 weeks, we're talking about a different story. And if we are, then I think, I'm not going to say it's smooth sailing, but I think you should be able to pull this off. In the end, like, the reality is, and I get it, it's tough because it's football, right? And, this goes probably deeper into, what we're going to talk about CFL-XFL, but, it's not apples to apples. I was frustrated last year because if you look around the world, like, I follow a lot of different sports, and if you look around the world, there is not a higher league in terms of revenue around the world that has not played a game. That's a fact. Like, whether it's Aussie rules football or cricket or rugby league or rugby union or the big five, so to speak, in soccer, hockey, football, baseball, basketball. I mean, the Canadian Football League's on an island here. Like, every soccer league in the world is playing. Every rugby league is playing. Every, hockey league outside of the Ontario Hockey League, for the most part, which canceled their season this year, has played. And so at some point, you'd think that, okay, I think they recognize this. You can miss one season. There's a lot of different cases where leagues have missed one season. I mean, Major League Baseball, they didn't finish 1994. Hockey, 2005, they didn't have a season, with a full season lockout. There's a lot of, the Spanish flu canceled the Stanley Cup. It canceled the last Grey Cup in 1919. That was the last Grey Cup that wasn't played until 2020. So you can miss one. I'm not sure you can miss two, in my opinion, especially, it's not like hockey where the NHL came back and in 2005, everyone was just thrilled because it's the best league in the world. The CFL has to worry about the National Football League. They're already losing people, and especially young people that, I'm a guy that loves both. I just love football. But, there are people in this country that pick one or the other. And over the course of the last year, no one's saying I picked the CFL if they're on the fence because they haven't played. So I think they have to find a way to play. That being said, I understand that their issues are a lot tougher than, say, basketball, right? Like the CEBL, Canadian Elite Basketball League, they played their second season last year. They played 2.5 weeks. This year's schedule is going to be 14 games apiece, but they don't require fans in stands, and I think part of the reason is you got 10, 12 guys on each team, right? I mean, if you add coaches, trainers, everybody involved, you're still talking about a group of less than 20. So that's far different than football, and I think that probably partially explains why football has struggled to really have any league have any success outside the NFL and the CFL, and why some of these spring leagues have come and gone, and NFL Europe and so on and so forth, is just the cost involved, right? You're talking about when we travel on the road with the Red Blacks, you're talking about a traveling party of 66, 44-man roster, medical, trainers, coaches, all that kind of stuff. So it's it isn't apples to apples, but at the same time, they have to find a way to play. And I think they will. I really think they will. And I think we're just going to be looking at a different world in 2 to 3 months, just when you look at everything. Like when you see fans at Angels games, for example, right? California was one of the most strict places in the United States. It's one thing to see it in Texas or Florida or whatever. But when you start to see that, when you start to see games being played in Europe, in places where they haven't had fans, like UK hasn't had fans. Hopefully that changes soon. And hopefully just that mentality of, okay, you know what? Hey, there's fans. Everywhere you look on TV, baseball, soccer, whatever, there's fans. All of a sudden, I think that'll change a little bit of the mentality once we're at a certain point in Canada with vaccinations where people say, okay, you know what? Time to turn the corner here. We should be a little bit further on where we want to be. And in the end, I think politicians, right? You talk about elections. There's an election here in Ontario in 2022. People are expecting an election here in Canada federally in 2021. I don't think you want to go into an election with people in Israel and the UK and the United States and Germany and everywhere around the world living normal lives as we're sitting here not allowed to go to a sporting event or a concert or a restaurant or a bar. So at some point when we reach that point when it's safe for everybody, then I think it's going to be go time here. And that's why I'm more optimistic than pessimistic.
Your president, Mark Goldie, he says that you guys are ready to go. Just, let me know, he said, let me know when we're ready to go for the season. So they certainly feel optimistic moving to the XFL. And I have a quote here in a minute too, but general thoughts on that and the XFL talks that have been going on the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me. I like the idea for a lot of different reasons. I don't love everything about it, right? Like there's certain things I'm not going to like about it. I know that. But I understand, like, to me, everyone's focused on the rules. To me, football is football. I don't care. Like I could list you my 20 favorite games in football history, and I could list you 6 or 7 in college football, 6 or 7 in the NFL, and 6 or 7 in the CFL. So like, to me, that has nothing to do with 3 downs, 4 downs. Like Auburn, Alabama, the kick 6, USC, Texas, Boise State, Oklahoma. I mean, Boston College, Miami back in the day. I can go on and on and on. Those were great football games. Like what started me, I started watching football in the early 1980s. And so I remember, the Chargers beating Miami in that epic overtime game in 1981. And then I remember the catch with Dwight Clark. And so like that wasn't good or bad or whatever because it was 3 down, 4 down. It's football. And so I get it. There are people that are a little more passionate about their brand of football. It has to be 4 down. It has to be 3 down. In the end, it's got to be a good product. And I think if it's a good product, then people will be on board. And, I'm positive that a guy like Wally Buono will be a big part in terms of the rules. And I don't think it's going to be NFL light if they do it. I think they want to be different. So what do they do? Do they have, CFL return rules? Do they have a CFL play clock so pacing is quicker? I mean, there's a lot of things, that you can do to kind of mesh the best of both worlds. For me, the bigger concern and what doesn't get enough play is the schedule, because how do you find a schedule that works for everyone? And the reality is you can't. You're compromising, right? In Canada, the Stanley Cup playoffs are a big deal. That takes place in late April, May, and early June. So that they're going to be playing games no matter when they start. At the very latest, I would think they'd start in April. I mean, Dave Naylor's talked about maybe March, but they're not going to be playing games in February. Everyone I've talked to is kind of April to September. Dave, is obviously as well connected as anybody, has talked about maybe late March, but so that's an issue right there. There's not a league really in the world that has a championship game and has their playoffs in the middle of summer, right? I mean,
NBA.
Well, but that's in June.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the NBA and the NHL are in June. Like I'm talking like July and August, right? And so like there's kind of there's football is typically played in fall, and then in this country playoffs in November. In the United States, college football, you have championship games in December, you have bowl games in December into early January, playoffs into that mode, and then there's a climax kind of like the football, the basketball, the hockey, and the European soccer model. Basically goes, okay, you play your games during the winter, and then spring to like early summer, like you're talking late June, you play a final. So how are playoff games going to be received in August, right? I guess is a question that I have. I don't love the fact that there's not going to be fall football. Labor Day is a big deal here. I understand. Okay, maybe you have championship game Labor Day. That's okay. But that's usually the time of year where people really get excited about football here, right? So you're talking about September and October, two really important months when it comes to the football calendar, where all of a sudden you might not be playing. So, but I get it, because if you're going that's why I love the idea. I love so many different things about it. I can tell you what I love about it. I'm just kind of being pessimistic here now for a change. But, I think, again, just in terms of the schedule, in terms of fall, I think if you're going ahead with this, to me, you need a commitment and money that you're getting a television contract, and not the hope that you're going to get one. No, you need a commitment. If you're going to go with that type of schedule and completely revamp what you're doing, because, for example, in Canada, the television ratings are by far the best after Labor Day. So if you're revamping everything, you better be, because you got contract in hand. Hey, you know what? Fox and ESPN or whoever has come to us and they're saying, we're giving you this to play at this time of year, and it's a long-term commitment, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it might be. Then you say, okay, you know what? How do we argue with this? Because we're getting a television deal, right? But I understand how problematic, right? It's as problematic to play against the Stanley Cup playoffs in April, May, and June as it is to play against football in September and October in the States, right? Against college football. I mean, what nights are you going to play? High school football Friday, college football Saturday. The NFL is taking Thursday, Sunday, and Monday. So you're going to play Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and maybe Fridays or something like that. So I get it. There's no perfect solution in terms of schedule, but to me, there's been way too much focus on 3 downs, 4 downs, in my opinion, and not enough on schedule, which to me, I think is the biggest issue here when you're talking about the 2 prime months of football in this country being September and October.
Very, very good points. Yeah, it seems like everyone we've talked to, it always comes back to, we got to keep our 3 downs. It's like, well, logistics need to be figured out first. I think you nailed that completely. Your GM, the Red Blacks GM, Marcel Desjardins, warned against going down the rabbit hole of XFL speculation. Not a game worth playing. Does he mean like just what do you think he means?
I'll tell you exactly what he means there. We asked him that question on the radio, and I think the question was, what do you tell your staff? So like this wasn't about the fans. Like this was, what do you tell your staff? And basically I think, his answer is a good one, right? How do you worry about that? We got to worry about the present. We got to worry about what we're doing in the here and now, right? So that's from a football perspective, football ops, coaches, that sort of thing, rather than I think, him telling the fans that. So I think, his answer was a good one, right? He's not going to worry himself about what he has to do scouting wise if all of a sudden he needs a different type of athlete, a different type of player, right? Because that's one of the big things about the CFL. You're not necessarily getting, in some cases, look, football is football, but there are certain players, much like international hockey, much like international basketball, that are just kind of more geared for the CFL game. The 6 foot, 230 pound linebacker who's a tweener, right? Too small to be a middle linebacker in the NFL, but he's perfect size to be a middle linebacker in this league with, the amount of ground you got to cover and that sort of thing. Like in the end, I think, from a football ops standpoint, you still worry about what you're doing in the here and now. You're still taking the same type of players that you think are going to be quote unquote CFL players. That smaller guy, that more athletic guy, that maybe wouldn't get a chance because of his size in the NFL. So, and if it changes, it changes, right? But I think that was kind of more the message that he wanted to get across.
Seems to make sense.
My last question for you today is, and this is first, I kind of just want to know where you're coming at this. I mean, we're going to do our main bulk of our show here once we get done with these interviews, and we'll flesh our stuff out. Knowing that the CFL XFL stuff is going on, that we're talking, whatever that means, I've had a lot of people ask me now in the last 2 days, hey, well, does that mean the merger's off? Does that mean whatever? What does it mean to you knowing that they're moving ahead with playing now and then continuing to, have these talks or whatever else? I mean, how do you grapple with that? Because I think that we're going to have to figure that out for us and our fan base and stuff moving forward here, in the next months now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's so hard to know. Like, I mean, there's so many questions, right? I mean, just in terms of, because like it's all, there's so much speculation about, okay, well, what's going to happen next year? What's going to happen 2023? And in the end, like, I think, like it seems like the CFL is just going forward and worrying about the here and now, which is a good thing, right? It's not like they said, like to have a Grey Cup in the middle of December. If you were starting right away in the spring, that could potentially be problematic, right? But hey, they're just looking at the here and now. So yeah, I'm curious to see where this goes. And I just think there's so much good that can come out of it. And I understand the traditions and all that stuff. Look, I grew up in Edmonton in the early 80s. I remember distinctly the last 2 to 3 years of the Warren Moon dynasty. So like I've got a great passion for this league for 40 years of watching games. And I appreciate, I've lived in 4 different provinces, BC, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Ontario. And I could walk to Quebec, right on the border. I could literally drive to Quebec in 5 minutes and walk there in 30 from where I'm at. So I've been in a lot of different parts of the country, and, I appreciate the history. I appreciate the tradition. I appreciate in particular the passion for this particular brand of football that people in, all over the country, but in particular in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, where, a lot of the frustration has come from, I think on social media. I understand where that's coming from. I do think that there's too many good things to avoid here. Look, number one, Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, they need a shot in the arm. And that's being nice about it. Like, the last 7 games, that I've broadcast in those markets over 2 seasons. 3 games in Montreal, I think it's 3 in Toronto, 2 in Montreal, 2 in Vancouver, 2018, 2019. I looked, the average attendance for those games, average announced attendance was 14,500 for 7 games. Highest was 17,000. And I can tell you, in terms of actual butts and seats, I don't know if it's over or under 10,000, but I know I'm not betting my life savings on either one. So you're talking about probably at best 10,000 people in seats, for those games over 2 years in the 3 biggest markets. You just, you have to make calls to all markets. And I get the passion in Saskatchewan. I get the passion in Manitoba. I get the passion, in different pockets across the country. I talk to people in Ottawa that don't like it as well. But I think, the biggest thing for me is, like, if Toronto says we're out, if Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment says they're out, and I have, no one has any proof that they've said that, but you can connect the dots here that they're pushing this narrative. So if they say they're out and Montreal says we're going wherever Toronto is going, and there's a Montreal-Toronto connection in terms of ownership there, and Vancouver's got no ownership right now. It's in a trust because Dave Brayley passed away, who, by the way, wasn't too long ago. He owned 2 of those 3 franchises in Toronto and BC. Well, you kind of connect the dots and say, okay, well, they need to look at something different. They need to look at something bigger, I think. And I think the biggest things for me, obviously broadcast is a part of it. And that's why I say, like, you need some sort of contract in hand, multi-year deal, with money from one of those big US networks to say, you know what, here's $100 million a year for 5 years, so that you say, okay, well, at least we've got time to build this, right? Not like we need this in year 1 or else we're screwed, right? So you need some sort of long-term thing there. The gambling part is huge. Like Larry Tannenbaum, I don't think it's been brought up enough, as a lot of different contacts in that regard. And so, I think, and that's starting to change in North America all over the place in terms of single game betting and everything that's going on here. So I just think, with fantasy football, you've got, you can only do so much with an 8 or 9 team league. And again, is it going to be an 8 or 9 team league if Toronto says we're out, right? So, there's a lot you can do on that front, and video games, right? I mean, you look at kids, and how many kids start watching the NFL because they started playing Madden, right? Or they started, watching the NHL because they played, NHL 21. I think if you go to EA Sports, right? I think if you go with The Rock, if you go with, the CFL history, but also you have The Rock, you have something new, you have the American market, you have some money from Redbird Capital. I think you can go and make that work, right? Like, I just don't think, it's not like they haven't tried to make a video game in the past. I've talked to people about that, but it's not easy to get done. And so if all of a sudden you go with, these groups and you say, hey, we want to do this. And now you've got EA Sports CFL/XFL football with picture of The Rock and a Toronto Argonaut and a Houston Roughneck on the cover. Maybe all of a sudden that makes a kid say, hey, you know what? I'm going to play this game. Hey, it's a great game. I'm going to tune in, right? Netflix. I can't even tell you how many people, like I just did, a bunch of hockey interviews actually before I came on here, because I'm doing American Hockey League games right now during the pandemic. And I asked, someone what he likes doing outside of hockey, and said, well, I'm watching F1 all the time because I like the Netflix series. So, like, if you can get something like that going, right? And I just think there's just more opportunities for that if you have both sides of the border. So, yeah, I mean, look, there's problems. There's things that are problematic for sure. This is not going to please everybody. But in the end, like, from my perspective, I'm 45 years old. I've been watching Canadian football and American football for 40 years. And the only thing that's important to me is that in 20 years, whether I'm calling games or not, if I'm in Ottawa, that I can go to a game. That's most important to me. And I think too many people have, like, like I get there's certain hills you want to die on. Like for me, the Grey Cup is one. Like the Grey Cup, you're talking about a 100+ year history. You don't throw that in the cupboard and say, you're gone. I'd like to see some sort of Canadian content. I don't know what that number might be, but some sort of Canadian content for sure, where they're not getting thrown under the bus. And I want teams in all 9 cities. That's it. But too many people have too many hills that they're dying on in terms of this 3 down, 4 down, or has to be this, it has to be that. Look, like I said earlier about spring and fall football, I'd love to be calling games in September and October. Guess what? It's probably not happening. That's the way it is. In the end, rather be calling games in April and going to games in May than not seeing football at all professionally in Canada. So I think that's why this needs to be explored, and let's see where it goes.
Absolutely.
Awesome. AJ Jakubec, thank you for joining us. Hopefully I got your name right again there on the pronunciation on the second one. We appreciate your time and talking with us and giving us some key insight.
Thank you.
Hey, can I get a year? Like I want like a full on year, like I see online.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Love it.
Awesome. Thanks, man. We appreciate it. We'll see you soon.
You bet. Cheers, guys.
Thanks.